This is Burning Questions, and the topic that set the internet on fire this week, and I suppose for the past 2.5 years, has been, what are Russia's red lines? Do they exist, or do they just exist in the heads of foreign politicians? And here with us in the studio today is Oleksandr Khara, who is going to help us answer these questions, or if not answer them, at least have a really great discussion about them. Oleksandr, could you please introduce yourself?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Oleksandr Khara. I'm a former Ukrainian diplomat. I used to be a U.S. candidate desk officer 24 years ago. Now I'm a director of the Center of Defense Strategies, a Ukrainian think tank that deals with the foreign security and defense policy of Ukraine.
That's amazing. So as someone very qualified to speak on this subject, I would like to know what your opinion is of these red lines. First of all, how would you define them in your own opinion? And secondly, do you think that they exist because we keep hearing that we can't get these weapons, or we can't strike these targets, or we can't do this or that specifically because of these red lines and escalation? So are these really that important, and should we actually be scared of them in the West, or is it a concept that has been merely made up in order to threaten the West into submission?
Oh, they are really important because, as you know, that something that can be born in our heads may influence the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And there is such a thing like the reflexive control theory, which was developed by one of the genius mathematicians during the Cold War time. And the idea is that we presume that the other people think the same way as we think, and they have the same values, and they act according to those values. So we can create a virtual, let's say, image of ourselves with our red lines or with our, let's say, values, whatever, and we can project that to the foreign audience, and particularly to those who are making decision, and we can play with that. So they are interacting not with us as real ones, with real values and red lines, but those we portray to be. And the Russians were very good at this during Cold War time, and they are really good now. So they are, and we understand that Russia is not a country that is ruled by rule of law and democracy and other things. So that's why we should read the Russian documents and the Russian legislation and judge it separately to what Putin and his minions may do. So if we are talking about red lines, the Russian red lines were that Ukraine should not approximate itself to the European Union and NATO. Now we have a candidate status to the European Union, and NATO was about to invite Ukraine to become a member of NATO. So it's not really red lines, or at least they are so flexible. Then the sanctity of the Russian territory. Mm-hmm. Now Ukrainian forces are on the territory of Russia in Kursk region.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that these red lines are flexible too. So we can stretch them up to the, let's say, how they call this garden circle, which is a, let's say, road around Moscow.
Yeah.
The provision to Ukraine of the first anti-tank missiles back in the days when Donald Trump was in office seemed to be like a trigger for the nuclear war, and then nothing happened. Then in 2022 we got Stinger missiles, and then we got heavy armaments, and now we have F-16s. Unfortunately, we still don't have Tomahawks missiles and some other stuff that may help us just like to degrade Russia's ability to wage the aggressive war and to target Ukrainian civilian infrastructure and civilians in general. We've seen in a couple of days the Russians targeted Lviv in Poltava, and there were many casualties, and certainly we could have avoided it should the West had not decided to be, let's say, restrained by those red lines drawn in the heads of the Western politicians and strategy makers. So yes, there are some red lines, legal ones. For example, they are defined in the nuclear posture that Putin adopted a couple of years ago, and that the very existence of Russia, if threatened, that Putin may push the red button. Then if we or someone is targeting the strategic deterrence capabilities of Russia. And actually, we've done it several times. I mean, we targeted Russian strategic bombers, this Russian early warning radar system, and so on and so on. We didn't see any reaction from that. So that's why we can say that there are some red lines, but they are not working for many reasons. That Russians are not going to start this sort of world war. They are not crazy ones. They are deterred by the United States and the possible consequences if they apply, let's say, tactical nuclear arms against Ukraine or a third party or somewhere in the Arctic, let's say. And there is a role of China, India, and the so-called global South, because a couple of days ago, Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, Mr. Ryabkov, said that Russia is revising this nuclear posture. And the next day, the Chinese spokesperson said that the nuclear war should not be fought and there should be no use of nuclear arms. So China is deterring Russia in this case.
China has honestly always been deterring Russia in these particular situations. China plays a double-sided game because, of course, Russia is a part of its economy, although not as big a part of its economy as people kind of assume, because technically the Chinese economy is built on the United States, and so they sort of have to do with they have to go with where the money lies, right? And that lies in the U.S., and Russia could never substitute for it. But it was very interesting to me how the world was reacting so severely to the fact that Russia wants to review its nuclear doctrine. And I just wanted to remind everyone that, pieces of paper in Russia seem to be just that, pieces of paper, because if we look at everything else that they have signed over the years, none of it seems to matter. So them reviewing the nuclear doctrine is really just blackmailing or gaslighting the West. So I'm curious if you are of the school of thought that Russia's red lines, those that, for instance, like air defense for Ukraine or aircraft for Ukraine, or now long-range ATACMS, for instance, that can strike into Russia's airfields, should be crossed. Because it seems to me that the way the world operates today is that we are scared of Russia's red lines, so we're not going to cross them, and therefore Russia is going to stay in line. But what we're seeing is that we are not crossing these red lines. Russia is not staying in line because Russia perceives the West as weak and as something that's not going to respond. So do you think that crossing these red lines is going to show Russia more of a force and keep it more in line than not doing so?
Well, first of all, I believe that we are at the point that our Western partners, in particular those in Washington, D.C., to realize that they have failed to understand Russia, and their strategies with regard to Russia and to Ukraine failed. From the beginning of the re-invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Joseph Biden outlined his approach towards the conflict, and he started with by saying what the United States are not going to do, which is from the point of view of the second-grade student of international relations of strategy is wrong, because you should not. It's better to have the strategic ambiguity. It means that more options on your table than on the table of your opponent. Secondly, if you decide that this conflict is of existential nature, not just for Ukraine and Europe, but the world, because if Russia wins this war, it means that all other bloody tyrants across the globe would do the same thing, and it will turn the world into chaos even more than it's now. And we see, and then actually we just we experience this turbulence of shift from the old international system with the dominance of the United States and European powers into something new. It's called multipolar world, but we don't know the exact setting and what
we don't know what these powers are.
But anyway, what's really important is just understanding that Russia understands only strengths, and a peace can be achieved through strengths. And actually, it's not just repeating the old thesis of Mr. Reagan, who made it possible for the Soviet Union, for the empire of evil to collapse, and then brought lasting peace to Europe, at least if you're not talking about the wars on the Balkans. But anyway, just crossing those red lines, we are showing that they are not really red lines. Secondly, if it's so important, you need to wage a risk and to have the risk benefits calculus. Thirdly, we should think not just about Ukraine, but as I said, about other countries. What Chinese would do with Taiwan if they see that nuclear deterrence works one way. During the Cold War time, there was a mutually assured destruction concept. Yeah. It means that two sides were ready to annihilate the world, not to allow the other side to win.
Yeah.
And it was a sort of, it's a crazy idea, but it just like set the, let's say, status quo or modus operandi of these two great powers that just like ruled out the direct confrontation. Certainly we have the Caribbean Missile Crisis in 1962, then there were a couple of other occasions in 1980s, like Able Archer nuclear drill in the United Kingdom, which the Russians thought to be a start of the nuclear war, and some other things. But in general, this idea that the both sides may destroy the world paradoxically made this world more safer. And those two sides were fighting somewhere on periphery. And this is why it's so important to just not to allow Russia to show that deterrence works just one way. Yeah. It should work both ways. And we have on our side even China, even though it's the senior partner of Russia. Yeah. And even though their strategic goal of pushing the United States out of the, let's say, chair of the global hegemon is the common goal. But Chinese are really interdependent with the West. One of the reasons why they are not supplying Russia with weapons, not because they love international law, they just love the UN Charter. No, because the sanctions and the access to the foreign markets and access to the foreign technologies. This is the only thing that is driving their policy, and they are trying to balance between Russia and
because they're going to kill their economy again. I think that one of the things that we have to our benefit, as in like the Western world's benefit, is the Chinese economy, as we talked about previously, is very dependent on the United States. I think most of their economy, actually, because it's mostly export, right? And the U.S. is the biggest importer of all of that, and the U.S. has the largest economy to be able to buy these things. I was actually laughing quite hard in the beginning of the invasion when someone told me that it's okay, China is just going to stand behind Russia, and Russia is going to substitute for the U.S. within Chinese economy. And I'm like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Russia, even if they wanted to, even if they had all the money in the world, they still couldn't. But also, I guess we have this advantage where the United States nuclearly is a lot stronger than Russia, because while Russia does have, there is a theory or there is an idea, right, and it's mostly prevalent among Ukrainians, so maybe it's also good to get your commentary on it, is that, Russia's weapons of nuclear war have not necessarily been in the best condition since the Cold War era, and that the United States at least maintains all of we know they maintain their weapons, and we know that they update them all the time, and we know that the U.S. is one of the largest military powers in the world. Russia apparently was the second largest, but we have seen that it's not so. So would you say that we should be scared of a nuclear war with Russia, or if that's just something they're bluffing about in order to keep us restrained, right? And whether it's even a possibility, and whether they would make this step towards the United States, provided that it's very likely that in a dictatorship, things like nuclear weapons don't necessarily get the treatment they, I wouldn't say deserve, but should have, while in a Western democracy like in the U.S., they definitely do. So do you think Russia is even ready to use nuclear weapons, or do you think they know that they're inferior in that way?
Well, first and foremost, there is no reason for them to employ the nuclear arms, tactical, not to mention the strategic ones. I'm not going to speculate about the state of the nuclear arms, because it's better in our calculation to presume that at least some of, let's say, they have 1,050 ICBMs, which are strategic arms, ready to be launched from nuclear triad, which is bombers, the land stations, and submarines. And we should not talk about it. And the Russians may use it, and I believe it will work. And even if 1/3 of this nuclear arsenal is ready to operate, it would be a disaster. But we should talk about the tactical nuclear arms. It's a bit different animal. You need some time to prepare for the use of these arms. And actually, if we knew something about Russians, so they threatened to use nuclear arms in 2014 when they started to illegally annex Crimea, and it was one of the deterrents that Obama administration was deterred on. Then in 2022, at least according to some journalists in the United States, the Russians were thinking about it, and there were some, let's say, signs that they are preparing this means. The rest was just the nuclear rhetoric. The Russians have many tactical nuclear devices, like missiles, bombs, and torpedoes and mines. So I believe they have pretty much of that. And certainly we should take into consideration. But as I said, there is no military reason for Russia to employ those, those, let's say, tools. We are not going to seize Moscow. There is no reason for Ukraine, to keep the Russian territory. What we are doing in Kursk is not that we want, like Russia, illegally annex Russian internationally recognized territory. No, it's just like for different reason, political and military one.
It's a geopolitical bargaining chip.
No, I don't think so. We put pressure on Putin in Russia, because he needed to decide whether he wants to declare a war against Ukraine, and he declared the counter-terrorist operation, which is completely different animal. Then he installed not the military in charge of the counter-offensive operation, but the FSB guys and loyal to him, which is good thing for us, because it means that efficiency of this campaign would be minimal. Then he actually violated the Russian law on defense. The Article 18 requires to declare the martial law and to enact all those tools that are available just to repel the aggression from the invasion state. So he didn't do that. He faces a dilemma whether he needs to declare general mobilization. Yes, there are 140 million Russians. And a lot of young men capable of fighting. But one thing, if you send to Midgrida, let's say, people of different ethnic origin from the far away corners of Russia, and it's sort of a genocide against minorities in Russia. But we don't care about this genocide because they came to commit genocide against us. So we want them to be dead or in prison or exchange for Ukrainian prisoners of war. Then, just like he faces this dilemma. If he calls the general mobilization, it means that wealthy guys from St. Petersburg, Moscow, and some other 21st century cities, not to mention the rest of the 16th century Russia, they would be called for military service. And it will break something that in the West people are calling the social contract. It's absolutely ridiculous thing to apply this term to Russia, but it's useful in this case. So we put pressure on Putin. And we put pressure on Putin outside, because now we show that we are this war is not a stalemate. We are capable of doing things that will bring not just military but political results. We we prevented rising voices of our friends and not friends that it's time to negotiate something, meaning not just Ukrainian territory but Ukrainian sovereignty to some extent. So now nobody is talking about, and actually Putin is not able to talk about Ukrainians, that Ukrainians need to recognize reality on the ground. Because on the ground, on Russia, are Ukrainian boots. And certainly he cannot repeat this formula anymore. Not to mention that how Xi Jinping and some other guys are looking at Russia, that Russia is a major nuclear power, way bigger than Ukraine in terms of demography, economy, and military potential, is not capable of defending its bit of territory. So all these things are really important. But anyway, we are talking about the red lines. We showed that there are no red lines. We showed that Russia is not going to employ nuclear arms because they had the chance before, but they were deterred by the United States and the Chinese and Indians and some others, and there is no military necessity for that. So we should keep in mind that they have these nukes, but from the other hand, we understand that there is no reason for them to employ, because we are not threatening their core of their, let's say, statehood. We are fighting against Putin and his regime, and Russians in general, overall, the majority of them support this genocidal war. But certainly we are not going to invade and occupy Russia or annex or divide Russia. So that's why, from the logical point of view, there is no reason to use nuclear arms.
You actually mentioned, that we are fighting against Putin and his regime, and then you added against Russia. I read an article in Foreign Affairs today that infuriated me. You might have read it as well, because you're smiling. And the article stated that the only way to end the war is complete defeat of Russia by Ukraine, or just freeze the conflict, wait it out, Putin dies, and then it's going to be, rainbows and butterflies in terms of negotiation with Russia. What do you think of that?
Well, it's just like, I don't know, naivety or stupidity of the authors. But in general, just have a look at the history of Russia, at least since 1991. So the Russians fought in the First Chechen War. They were defeated, and they agreed that Chechen Republic is an independent one. Yeah. But Putin came to power, not just blowing apartment buildings across Russia, just to threaten the Russians and blame everything on Chechens. He violated the agreement that he signed with the previous Chechen government. In case of Ukraine, in 1997, we signed an agreement, and the Russians recognized our territorial integrity and so on. Actually, even before that, in 1993, 1994, they tried to annex Crimea, even before Ukraine wanted to be a member of the European Union and NATO. So all those who are saying that everything is about the expansion of NATO and Putin just reacts, it's just like, it's not true. Not to use the big bad words. Then there was...
it needs to be reiterated once in a while, because I feel like people do forget. So thank you for
1997. The agreement that the Russians recognized our sovereignty, territorial integrity, including Crimea. Putin on many occasions said that there are no, let's say, problems with Crimea, which is Ukrainian, and so on and so on. Then 2003, and at that time I should remember that Mr. Kuchma was in power, not the other presidents. The Russians tried to annex part of the Kerch the channel and some waters in Azov Sea and the Black Sea. They were threatening us with the use of force. So we were on the brink of the war.
And part of the island, right? Because that's where they built the famous...
Tuzla Island was really important because just like according to the international law, the Kerch Channel was divided in half. And we kept this channel in proper condition, so all the let's say, loaded cargo ships may go into Azov Sea and back. And the Russians were not doing the same thing on their part. So they decided, like the big brothers, they need to take control of something that belongs to the younger brothers that they considered us at that time. So we signed an agreement in 2004 on the joint use of the Azov Sea, Kerch Strait, and the Black Sea. Then certainly there was 2014. I'm not talking about Budapest Memorandum 1994 when we give up the third largest nuclear arsenal for security guarantees from the Russian side.
May I add something? I think that one of the problems that arises with the Budapest Memorandum and the security guarantees is that many people don't know that the language in the English version and the language in the Russian version at the time was very different, because a lot of foreign experts that I talked to operate with the notion that there were no security guarantees. There were security, possibly assurances, but more like a consultation situation, because they've read the agreement. While in the Russian version of the agreement, they were guarantees, and the translation happened that way, likely on purpose. So Ukraine would give up the nuclear arsenal, and we would think that we are safe and secure, but the US and other countries wouldn't actually have to stick up for us.
You're completely right. But if you have a look at the Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or at any bilateral security arrangements that the United States have with South Korea, Japan, and some other countries in the region, there is no clear statement that in case there is an aggression against this state, the United States automatically may go into the war against this aggressor. And actually, just like a bit back into the history of NATO, when the first draft of the charter was introduced, the American Congress said that they are not going to approve it. For the simple reason, only those elected by the American people should decide whether the United States need to take part in any war.
Yeah.
And that's why we have Article 5, a bit vague Article 5. But the most important thing, it's not just what is written in legal terms, but the political will to stick behind this, let's say, commitment. And that's why Japan and South Korea are pretty secure, even though they didn't have even closer to something to Article 5 of the North Treaty Organization. So what I'm saying, that the Russians violated many things, not to mention OSCE Final Act of 1975, when actually Mr. Brezhnev decided that the idea of spreading communism around the world was not a good idea. It's better to keep the Soviet territory, at that time Ukraine was a part of that, intact. So he signed these agreements, and those agreements, Helsinki Final Act, are talking about the non-use of force or non-threat of use of force and the security of the territorial integrity of other states. So the Russians violated the whole number of agreements on which our international order based on UN Charter, OSCE Final Act, and many, many others, not to mention dozens and dozens agreements with Ukraine. For what reason they need to obey something new? If I have a solution, we can agree that Ukraine is not a part of NATO, but then the United States and partners would provide us with, let's say, 150 F-35s, Tomahawk missiles, submarines, and many, many other stuff, and the Russians would pay for that. So I would agree that Ukraine is a neutral state in not going to join any alliances. But certainly, I'm joking, it's not going to materialize. The Russians want to control us. And it's not because the expansion of NATO, which is a wrong term. We witnessed the escape of those countries that were occupied by the Russian Empire or Soviet Union before into the West. It's not an expansion that Brussels and people in Washington are just like dreaming of expanding and then just like dividing Russia. It's absolutely not true.
It's a normal response to aggression.
The reason for us to apply for the membership is we want to be independent. We want to choose our partners and our way of life, not to be against Russia, until after we restore our territory and sovereignty, territorial integrity and sovereignty, where we will be aggressive against Russia for obvious reason. We want to return our territory and our people who actually illegally deported from some territories and used against us in this war. So Russia would be better off with NATO in Belarus, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova. Because NATO has never attacked anyone. The only case that Article 5 was triggered was the operation, counter-terrorist operation against Taliban in Afghanistan. Never NATO was part of any conflict. And that's why it would be better off for Russia to have a stable democracy on their side, and to focus on real security threats that they have. And actually, it's from the south, from Asian republics, and particularly extremism, fundamental Islam, and some other things, and in long-term China. Because now China is rising, and on some Chinese maps, parts of the contemporary Russian territory are, let's say, painted in Chinese colors. So in one day, it may happen. So that's why for Russia, I conclude, for Russia, it's the only way how to get out of these troubles, just like to stop the war, to get out of our territory, get our people back, they deported. welcome Ukraine's accession to the European Union and NATO, and then deal with all those troubles that they have at home and deal with the threats that they have abroad.
Of course, but they are a wannabe empire, and they're never going to do that because they don't think reasonably, right? Someone said to me the other day that the problem of the West is that, well, the problem of Western perception of Russia and Russian perception of Russia is that Russia sees itself as the empire it no longer is, and the West sees Russia as the empire it never will be. So that's kind of like the problem. And I guess the best way to conclude this discussion would be, we always talk about Russia's red lines and what we shouldn't do to not provoke or trigger Russia. What do you think the West should do in this particular situation in order to draw our red lines that Russia will be scared to cross? Because so far, I think Russia thinks that we have none as a Western world cumulatively, and Russia just does whatever Russia wants to do because we don't necessarily push back.
Well, you're absolutely right. People in Washington want to keep this conflict limited, not a total war. The Russians are waging total war against Ukraine. So people in the West don't want this conflict to spill out of the Ukrainian territorial borders. But actually it happens because the Russian saboteurs are killing people in Germany, in Bulgaria, and some other countries. They sabotage, they commit acts of sabotage across whole of Europe. And not to mention election interference, propaganda, disinformation, and other things that, just like a day-to-day business. And not to mention the strategic corruption, like Angela Merkel and her former boss, and so on and so on.
Schroeder. I mean, there are so many.
Yes. Our red lines. I mean, not just Ukraine, or the West, certainly should be, not to target civilian infrastructure, but we're just like we cross those lines, or Russians cross these lines, and they were not punished. Like Kakhovka Dam was blown up by Russians. And people in the West were just like rumbling around and asking whether it's Ukrainians who just committed such an atrocity against themselves, killing their own civilians, not to mention making obstacles for our counteroffensive operation and so on. So, just like after the Russians downed MH17, I believe it should have been triggered in the West to understand that there are no moral and other, let's say, red lines in Russia. They're going to commit any crimes to achieve their goals. And certainly with the aim to stop them, they should have provided Ukraine with everything we need to deter, if we are talking about 2021, when the Russians blackmailed the United States and European partners with get your belongings and get off the European continent. Yeah. So at that time, they just they thought it was possible to park Russia. They failed to do so, and so on. So the only way how to change the situation, to have a strategy of Ukraine winning this war, not losing and Russia not winning, because it's completely different. It's the war of attrition, where the Ukraine is going to lose many. Well, in terms of blood and treasure, and possibly be a dysfunctional state in a couple of years. So that's why it's not in the interest of Europe to lose Ukraine as a contributor of peace and security in the future. So it's better for Ukrainians to win than to agree that the Russian setting, its quasi-empire, whatever, is going to collapse. It happened twice in the previous century, in 1917 and in 1991.
Of course, well...
And it's better to be prepared. And Ukraine may play a positive role. We will be the first peacekeepers on the territory of Russian Federation to stop the bloody civil wars and religious wars and some other wars on Russian territory. So it's better to keep our men safe, with aim to deter Russia in the future if it's not going to collapse, or if it collapses, that Ukraine may take part in that. And certainly we may provide security guarantees for the Baltic states and along with Poland and some other countries, because it's the acute problem for those countries. Now they are better off because Finland and Sweden is in NATO, and the Baltic Sea is a NATO lake, as they say. We need to convert the Black Sea into NATO lake as well, and it would mean that Russia, there is no place for Russia to expand westwards. It means that the Russians would need to turn their attention to their domestic problems and their foreign relations, or for foreign security threats, and so on and so on. So we should draw these red lines. But unfortunately, the West is still hesitant because it's in their fear of escalation. They are just like attracting Putin to go further and cross each and every red line and commit and continue to commit genocide against Ukrainians.
Yeah, I do agree with you. I mean, I say this all the time. I had an interview with one of the professors from Dartmouth who signed the open letter asking NATO not to consider Ukraine as a member yet. And boy, was I was incredibly frustrated in that conversation, because I think one of the things and one of the summaries to what we've talked about is that the only way to win against Russia is to start listening to Ukrainians, because full circle coming back here in the beginning of this conversation, you said that the Western world failed to understand Russia. And I think, in my humble opinion, we have the understanding of how to stop them, and they have the means to do it. And what they're not doing is they're not listening to us with the experience, with the knowledge to do this. And unless they start doing it, we're not going to, the world is not going to win against this, because it's a very dangerous thing that they're threading on. And every single time I speak to Western experts, and I speak to many, every single time there is this air of condescension where they still do believe that they understand better than Ukraine does what to do with Russia. And every single time they say, oh, but the Western world should decide the Western foreign policy against Russia. And I asked one of my interviewers a question, and I think maybe you can answer it too, in your opinion, right? Aren't we in this because we have only been listening to Western experts and not listening to Ukraine? So 10 years from now, if we continuously keep thinking that in the West we know better and just continue dismissing Ukraine, aren't we going to be in a lot more trouble 10 years from now?
Well, yeah, I completely agree with you. Just recently, during the GlobSec conference, Ursula von der Leyen said that we for way too long we ignored and didn't listen to the Eastern and Central and Eastern Europeans, and including Ukrainians. So the Germans seems to understand that it was a failure. They wanted to get Russia closer, and they ignored interests of the Baltic states, Poland, and certainly Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. But from the other hand, they have their own domestic constraints, not just political, but a strategic one. And actually, all those people who, I would say, were a part of this architecture that led to this war, in White House, in consulate in Germany, are still there. I mean, on the level of advisors on national security and other things. So they still have this. And this is one of the key and fundamental problem. It goes back actually to the Bolshevik Revolution, and this history that the Bolsheviks killed some of the intellectual elites, but they shipped the rest to Istanbul and to Europe, so-called the philosophical steamship. And those people brought the knowledge of the imperial Russia and then the Bolshevik Russia to the West. They were teaching all those experts on the Soviet Union, Sovietologists, and now still. So they taught all those people via the prism of interests and values or ideas of Russia. And certainly ignoring all those countries, dozens of countries that appeared after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And we still have the same problem in the Western universities. When people are talking about Eastern European studies, it's Russia and just a bit of appendix of other things. So I believe that the key problem that the West needs to just revisit the idea that they need to have real experts. And unfortunately, we have a few of them. Fortunately, we have Timothy Snyder, who is talking about history, or Sergei Plokhy, Ukrainian-Canadian historian, who are trying to spread the world about
also Rory
Ukraine.
Finnan. He works at Cambridge, and he founded the Institute of Ukrainian Studies in Cambridge, and his heavy emphasis is on the Crimean Tatar culture in Ukraine, which is
but in
incredible.
general, they're just like thanks for their just role and what they're doing, but it's not enough to change the course of this ship, that's heading into the trouble, and actually in the trouble waters right now. Not to mention Ukrainian experts, and not just Ukrainian, Polish, let's say Czech, the Baltic experts. They've been talking about it from the beginning. Actually, people. Let's say, are not happy with Ukrainian rhetoric that we want to be a part of the transatlantic community. Mm-hmm. And they say, you are arrogant, you are rude, whatever. Mm-hmm. But if you have a look at the cables, diplomatic cables of the 90s, how the Czechs, the Polak, the Baltic nations were talking to Americans and Germans, trying to get onto this under this security umbrella of NATO. They were more rude, but they understood from the beginning that the Russian weaknesses for some time, the Russians will consolidate and start their genocidal expansion because they don't understand anything else. So the problem is here. Fortunately, the situation is much better than it was in 2014, when people wanted just to ignore what's going on in Ukraine. Nobody just paid attention what happened when the Russians annexed Crimea and started their proxy war in Donbass. In 2022, there was a bit different story. Zeiten went in Germany and some other places, but unfortunately, our partners are not living up to the commitments they made. I'm not talking about Estonia. Now Denmark is the number one country, which is ratio of GDP to the contribution to Ukraine is the largest one. And then on second place, Estonia. A tiny Estonia provided Ukraine with more assistance than the giant United States or Germany or other countries.
Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania.
Yes, we just we appreciate what they've done. I mean, the United States, Germany, and some other countries. In France, Macron was saying that do not humiliate Putin. We said and we showed that it's not just we are not provoking escalation by humiliating Putin. It's just necessity to do this thing. The only way how to deal with him is to humiliate, to show that he is not able to achieve his goals, and he is going to lose this war. And Russia, I believe that Russia is going to collapse for the simple reason they overstretched their resources. They did. Secondly, with the inability to control Ukraine, the key pillars of their imperialist ideology are not available anymore. I mean, the gathering of Rus lands. Yeah. It means that they need to control the Kiev. The third Rome concept, which is anathema, it's just like heresy according to the Christian belief. Because we have a Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and we separated from Russia, and it's recognized at least by some of the Orthodox churches, and certainly this process will take time, but it's not going to stop. So they cannot claim that they're biggest Orthodox country. Then they've been saying these stories that they won the Second World War or the Great Patriotic War, they can repeat. They cannot repeat with tiny Ukraine. Yeah. Yes, we 54 nations support us by arms and other stuff, but we are fighting on our own, for our own purpose. It's not the same thing like fighting against NATO. So that's why Putin, whoever is going to succeed him on this throne, are going to face first and foremost ideological dilemma, on which pillars to build the future Russia on. And the imperialistic ideas actually coined in the 16th century, majority of them, are not working anymore. But he cannot provide Russians, or his elite cannot provide with any vision of the future, because it means that he needs to give some freedom to the Russians, not to unite around the Führer of the Russian world and to fight against the whole world. It's a stupid idea. We've seen it with the previous Führer. He lost this war. So that's why we just there is understanding in the West that Russia is a threat. There is understanding that they need to support Ukraine. But unfortunately, they still do not live up to the commitments and they are not providing us with all the means that we need to defend our territory and to survive and to be part of this family of free nations.
Well, it's likely because they're also not seeing the immediate threat. And I like to say that, everyone in the West thinks that Russia is not going to invade them, but tanks do not have to be rolling through your cities for Russia to have invaded you, invaded your cinema, invaded your universities, invaded your politicians, invaded everything. And interestingly, I think that this rhetoric from Macron that was saying that, do not humiliate Putin is very funny to me because this is feeding into Putin's delusions. It's kind of creating this like celebrity status quo for him. And my best example, I guess, that's understandable for everyone who's going to be watching this is celebrities, right? We inflate their egos. We let them think that they can walk into the restaurant and treat the staff, with a particular arrogance. We let them think that they're the center of the universe because we take pictures of them and we treat them like they're not people, they're something deified. So what we're doing with Putin is the same thing as we're doing with these celebrities. In reality, it's just a person that stars in a movie, and we inflate their character and we give them the status. The same as Putin is just a person. And the reason why people are scared of him and the reason why he has this aura around the West is because the West gives it to him.
And actually, he carefully designed this image. And actually, there is nothing new because Russia is a totalitarian state, and they just copied everything possible from the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. They even use the same rhetoric like the Nazis.
Of course.
And this cult of personality and all those tyrannic regimes are based on that. And just like not offending Putin means that you are helping him to project this image into the populace at home and to the foreign markets as well. So that's why one of the first things needs to be done. It's just to humiliate him, to show that he's not just he's not a strategist. Certainly he has some strategic goals, but he showed that he miscalculated many things.
So many things.
Ukraine, reaction of the West, reaction of the world. Now he's trying to just to mend this damage he caused to his country. He may sacrifice even more, but certainly he's trying to survive as a leader of that country, and he wants to protect his ideology. He wants to to get Russia what he thinks that Russia desires. So that's why these psychological things are really important, and humiliating Putin it's one of the key things. And we just I believe it's in Ukrainian tradition. If you look at the Cossack time, they were mocking each and everyone. And the famous letter to the Ottoman Sultan that the Ukrainian Cossacks wrote, it's something. It says a lot about Ukrainian culture in our personality, and it's completely different in Russia. And actually, if you want to undermine the totalitarian rule, you need to just to show the populace that the image of the ruler there is a huge gap between the real person, his intellectual, physical, and other abilities, and his image. And this distrust is something that may help not just us, but our neighbors as well, and possibly Russians. Actually, the most let's say happy thing that may happen to Russians is defeat in Russia, in Ukraine, and
collapse. Yeah, because
they will have their country back into their hands, and they may do something worth of living for in this country, not to conquer other countries, not to destroy, and not to waste huge amount of resources that the Russians possess on this useless for many Russians, except of those who are making money, killing Ukrainians. But in general, I'll say out of 140 millions, I believe 80% are not benefiting from this war. So that's why the defeat of Russia in Ukraine, it would be the Russians would be better off, not to mention Ukrainians and the rest of the world.
Yeah, that would be the best thing that happens to the rest of the world and to Russians, because also if Russia collapses, then all of these republics and all of these peoples whose culture and language and everything have been persecuted can have a chance at actually creating their own identity. I guess the best conclusion to draw here is that everything that Putin says the West shouldn't do is what the West should take into account as things to do. It's kind of like, let's not protect the bully and let's bully the bully back, because you fight fire with fire in this case. And I guess that the best, not even conclusion, but the best lesson we can learn from this conversation is that if we don't stop being scared of red lines and being scared of Putin, then he is going to actually do the things we're scared of because we're not showing to him and to Russia that we can defeat them. So fighting Putin and weakening Putin is only going to be done by crossing the red lines and stepping on his toes, not the other way around. So thank you so very much for being at the studio today and giving us an hour of your time and telling us how we can better understand what red lines are and how to work with them. So thank you very much. I will see you next time, and hopefully I will see you here again. And in the meanwhile, I hope that you guys derive a lot of conclusions from this conversation and maybe nudge your politicians wherever you're at to watch this video and give it a thought as well.